And now, Fastened Like Nails with Dr. Mark Hamby.
Welcome to Fasten Like Nails. I'm Mark Hamby. In the studio next to me, I've got my co-host, Molly Mayo.
Hello.
Molly, we've had so much fun recently, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
and I love when we have
Very good.
guests. Mm-hmm. And Mike Card is sitting next to me to my right. Mike, it's been a joy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good golly, Miss Molly.
Yes.
I saw her this morning. I got out of the car. I started.
It was,
That's right. She carried the guitar for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she said, my mom used to say that. Your mom's old like me.
No, it was funny to hear.
And Mike's been teaching all week at our Master's Guild, teaching the Gospels, and particularly yesterday taught the voices of Jesus.
That was so good.
We're going to get into that a little bit today.
It's crazy.
And-
The time just has flown by. It's like tomorrow's your last day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I thought,
crazy.
Whoa,
I
tomorrow's
thought
your
the
last
same
day.
thing. Yeah.
That is crazy.
Because when I started, I go, how in the world am I going to fill up all this time? like 5 whole days. I don't have that much content.
Yeah, you have an abundance of content. And we're excited about what we're about to share. I'm going to just kind of review just slightly. This is for you. Yesterday, Molly and I shared about the 3 specific times that Jesus went to the temple. And the first time is in John 2, and he says,
Tears it up.
my Father's house. He calls it his Father's house. The second time he goes to the temple, he calls it my house. First time is my Father's house. Second time is my house. The third time he goes there, this is very interesting, calls it my house again. But this time he goes to Bethpage and Bethany. Both places, both towns. One is the house of figs. The other is the house of dates. Both sweet fruit. The sweet fruit of praise from the lips, according to Hebrews 13. Now listen to this. Jesus is looking for fruit in the temple. And what does he do? He drives out all the money changers. He doesn't find fruit there. The house is a house of prayer, prayer that leads to fruitfulness. And he leaves the temple, comes back the next morning, and guess what he says next? Your house is left unto you desolate.
Interesting.
My Father's house?
That's when he curses the fig tree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Curses the fig tree because there's no fruit and there's only leaves on it.
Yeah.
And people are living in hypocrisy. They're not really fruit bearers in the temple, casting everything out. So my Father's house, my Father's house, my house, now your house.
Wow.
Isn't that just the coolest?
Yeah, that is cool.
I Don't you love discovering
Structure.
things like that?
I know you like structure.
Yeah, I do.
Structure's interesting.
Isn't it great
Biblical
how
structure.
God has given us all unique? Molly, you read the scriptures differently than I do.
Yeah.
Mike,
Yep.
you read it.
And the Holy Spirit interacts with us and shows us all different things. And I closed class today saying you will see things that a guy with a PhD will never see.
Yeah.
You know, but because what's the one unique moment in Jesus' life when he's said to be filled with joy through the Holy Spirit? What fills Jesus with joy is that God hides things from the wise and he reveals them to little children. Wow. That makes him really happy for some reason.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And we experience the same thing when our students are listening to us and there's that aha moment.
Yep.
You're like, I love that. I love Molly.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my greatest moments in the classroom when you could just, especially, this was Molly, her first semester. Molly would do this. I'm getting my hands exploding on my head, but
Yes.
I love watching that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're teaching on the voices of Jesus. What is that? The voices of Jesus.
Well, we're looking at the 4 faces of Jesus in the 4 different Gospels, and the idea being that they're all nuanced in very significant ways. And sometimes we're taught, well, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those are the synoptics. That's they're kind of that's all the same thing. And then John's 92% unique, so John's really different. But what I'm trying to say is, no, they're all different. There are things that Mark is interested in that Matthew is just not interested
He could care less.
Yeah, and so their portrayals of Jesus and their backgrounds, the communities that they're writing to, it's all different, and they really, at least for me, it really makes the Gospels come alive.
Okay, so who's Mark writing to?
Well, Mark is one of the most interesting backgrounds because Mark is really the Gospel of Peter. Peter calls Mark my son, okay? And what we have in Eusebius, the first collector of church histories, is the people in the church in Rome, they came to Mark, and it's not going to be long till Peter, is going to be killed. And they said, please write down his testimony, what's going on. And in 2 Peter, what does he say? He says, I'm doing everything I can so that when I'm gone, you'll be able to remember these things.
Yes.
He's talking with Mark, and they're putting together the Gospel of Mark. So I tell my class, okay, that's a detail, but what does that detail mean? Well, when you read the Gospel of Mark, the influence of Peter is all over Mark. The emotions of Jesus is far more emotional in Mark. He gets madder in Mark. In John, he's fairly unemotional. But in Mark, he gets mad. He's filled with compassion. He looks around in anger. He tells people strictly, don't do this. And I think that's a reflection of Peter. But
what's the thing about immediately? Immediately this happened. Mark's like immediately. Everything happens immediately.
Yeah. I think that's part of the simplicity of his gospel. It's the Greek word outhos. And I think he uses it 11 times in the first chapter. Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah. And when we translate,
I never saw that.
if you translate that literally, it sounds boring,
Yeah.
right? Immediately Jesus did this, and then he got emotional, and immediately did this, and immediately. And I think it's part of, I'll say this, the Gospel of John is elegant. The Gospel of Mark has a simplicity and a starkness about it. And I think the way he keeps saying, there's a word, I can't paraphractic. There's a big word for that style where, and then we did this, and then we did that, and it's a simpler literary style.
Interesting.
And I think that's what you would expect from someone who's sitting down and simply writing down what another person is telling him. In John, you have a guy who's preached these things for 50 years, and so it's elegant and it comes together in themes. And there are things obviously in John that Mark's not interested in. John's interested in different things, and that's fascinating to me. One of the keys to Mark, though, is the life situation. Mark, we know, was written to Christians who were suffering persecution.
Right.
They were blamed for the fire in Rome, and
Nero.
Nero 64, and what Mark wants you to know is, you Christians who are suffering persecution, being crucified. I mean, Nero is lining his garden with crucified Christians, and when it gets dark at night, he's setting them on fire for lanterns. That's the world the first readers of the Gospel of Mark are living in. And so what Mark wants you to know is, you're never going to suffer anything that Jesus hasn't suffered. Okay, you need to know Jesus is right there with you. And one of the good examples is Mark's telling of the temptation story. Mark is not interested in that story. Okay? There's no detail. It's 2 verses.
Interesting.
There's no turn the stones into bread, leap from the table.
Yeah.
None of that is in Mark. Mark says one thing. He says when Jesus was in the wilderness, he was with the wild beasts.
Interesting.
So why do you think Mark says that? It's because his first readers are being thrown to wild beasts.
Oh, whoa.
And Mark wants you to know, you're never going to experience anything that Jesus hadn't experienced.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
Did you hear this earlier?
Isn't that
Yeah,
interesting?
he taught it in class.
Yeah.
Whoa.
This is all from
Crazy.
Bill Lane. This isn't my work. This is Bill Lane's work.
Incredible.
Isn't that interesting? So
Wait. Let me stop you. I've heard you say that probably over 25 times already. This is Bill Lane's work. This is Bill Lane's work. And I know that you were mentored by him for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And he is a part of your life.
Absolutely.
But these things are yours now. I think
absolutely.
They are. No one else could teach this. Bill Lane could not teach this. Is it Bill?
Yeah.
He could not teach this stuff like you're teaching it right now. This is God's.
I'm pretty much copying the way you used to.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. The way you teach it is so creative and artistic.
Well, I honestly, I learned that from Bill. Now I make it my own. I try to make it. I'm not just parroting what I heard this man say. Because it is so interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I find the person of Jesus endlessly fascinating.
You wear it in your heart. It comes out of your voice. And, okay, let's go back to the
he just is.
The beast. Okay, so
Yeah.
so when did Mark? So Mark was a turncoat. He took off, right? Wasn't this the same Mark that?
He's not a turncoat. He's a young man who doesn't want to go to Perga, and everybody else does, and he wants to go home. He's homesick. So I wouldn't call him a turncoat.
Okay, so he didn't run away, but he ran away, I thought.
No, he doesn't run away. He goes home. Yeah, no, Mark's not a bad guy. Mark's a good guy, but he's a young guy. You know who his uncle is? Barnabas.
Yeah, I know.
Right? He's the nephew of Barnabas. And so what happens, he and Barnabas then go on mission trips together. After Mark goes home, Barnabas, I think, understands. Barnabas and Paul have an argument about Mark, right? And Barnabas sides with his nephew, which he should.
Yeah.
But from that point on, no, Mark, he continues to be a missionary, and Paul and Silas. From that time, it's Barnabas and Mark and Paul and Silas. They
That must
split.
have been intense, though.
I think it was, and I think that's Paul. I think that's Paul's intensity.
Yeah.
He doesn't have sympathy for this young man. You know,
Interesting.
Perga is not the. I don't want to go to Perga. If I'm Mark, I want to go home. You know, I'm 15, 16 years old. I don't know how old he was. He was young.
I want to go to Perga.
Well, that's the difference between you and me. Yeah.
Barnabas and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And my uncle says, Mike, I understand. Let's go home. Okay.
Well, no, we go like, he was to a turncoat.
Yeah. I think he eventually dies for Jesus. So, you know, he's martyred. So,
look what Paul says at the end of one of his, it's like, and bring Mark,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Paul comes around full circle. And
He does. I think Paul, Paul was a Pharisee, and he was fairly, it's God's word and it's perfect. Paul is not the guy you want to hang out with. Okay?
Yeah.
Peter's the guy you want to go have a cup of coffee with.
Yeah.
Paul I don't think he was that fun to hang out with, but that's just me.
very intense.
That's
Yes,
interesting.
that's it. He's very
Yeah,
intense.
he is intense. Okay, so we've got this. So Mark is Peter's gospel. Peter is the one that is really disciples Mark. Barnabas disciples Mark. Mark is there. Mark comes from a rich home too, I think.
Yes, he does. I think there's every chance that the Lord's Supper took place at Mark's house.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, so the young man that ran out naked.
We think that's Mark. I tell my students, you know, don't read Mark because there's nudity in it. Because what happens is, you know, there's this young man. What happens is that soldiers are leaving town to go arrest Jesus. They go by Mark's house.
Yeah.
He's laying in bed. He just wraps a sheet around himself and runs there to warn Jesus. Gets there too late. The soldiers grab the sheet. He runs away and runs away naked.
What a bizarre story.
It is. But, you know, it's so bizarre it could only be true. Nobody made that up.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
why would that be in the Bible?
Yeah, unless you're the guy it happened to.
Yeah.
Unless you're writing about it.
That's
It's
crazy.
It's in the book of Mark.
Yeah.
So most likely Mark's writing about himself.
Oh, I think he was.
Yeah.
But I think the Lord's Supper, I think in essence the church starts in his house.
Wow.
So how appropriate is it? I mean, when they're praying for Peter, when Peter's in prison in Acts 12, they're
Mark's
Mark's
house.
house.
Yeah.
And so how appropriate that the writer of the first gospel, the church started at his house.
Wow.
So cool.
Yeah.
And didn't Mark, though, go to Alexandria? Where did the Gospel of Mark end up first?
I don't know. I mean, the Gospel of Mark was written for Christians in Rome. I don't know the background of what happened to him. You know,
Okay, so that's Mark.
biblically.
So now let's go to Matthew. Matthew is written, obviously, to a Jewish audience.
Yes, it's the most Jewish of all the Gospels, written by the worst Jew that Jesus had on his team. Okay?
Wow.
Divided into 5 books like the Torah. And one of the hallmarks of Matthew is everything Jesus does has to be substantiated by an Old Testament passage. So Jesus moves to Nazareth.
And there's an Old Testament passage.
And so he says, this is to fulfill what was said, he will be a Nazarene.
Wow.
Of course, there's no verse that says that.
Seriously?
No. There's no verse that says he will be a Nazarene. There's a verse that alludes to the fact that the Messiah will be a rod. And the Hebrew word for rod is netzer.
Oh,
So the only verse we can find that sounds like the verse that he's quoting is that verse.
Is that in Isaiah?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's Matthew. He collects, Papias, one of the earliest writers about all this church history, said that he collected the logia, the sayings of Jesus, and that's what you have in Matthew. I tell people, if you have a red letter Bible, just flip through the pages, and there are 5 big blocks of red letters. That's the structure of Matthew.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, talk about structure. I like that.
And after Jesus had finished saying all these things, that's usually the book, the page marker that says, okay, we're going to the next book.
That's so
Very
cool, because that would be
logical.
Matthew chapter 5 through, 7? That's that whole section of the law and the prophets and
All red
the
letters.
Beatitudes. Oh,
Right,
interesting.
Right.
Okay.
And there was another point I was going to make, but I forgot what it was. But Matthew is the most Jewish of all the Gospels.
Okay. And it was written to Jerusalem.
We're not really sure. We think it was written to we know it was written to Christians who were still in the synagogue, and it's written at that point in history when Jewish Christians are starting to be excluded from the synagogue. And that's what he wants you to understand. His portrayal of Jesus is that he wants you to understand that Jesus understands, his own family, excluded him, that sort of thing. So
I think at the ending of it too, during the crucifixion, and I think there's a section there where he talks about the Roman soldiers, save yourself, come down from the cross, save yourself, and then others say he said he could have saved. If he saved
others, why can't he save himself?
Yeah, exactly. And then it says it 3 times, and it's interesting.
Structure.
Yeah.
But what's amazing about that, if he did save himself, he could not have saved others.
Right. He saves others by not saving himself.
Yes.
That's what Frederick Buechner says.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
And that's really the call for our lives.
Absolutely.
Take up your cross and follow him.
Yeah, and we looked at class today. We had a list of what I refer to as the non-negotiables. What are the non-negotiables? Jesus says, if you don't do this, you can't be my disciple. And that's one of them. If you don't pick up your cross, you can't be my disciples. That's a non-negotiable.
Okay, there's one. If you don't deny yourself, you can't be my disciple.
I can't remember all of them. One of them is you got to leave your family. If you don't leave your family, if you don't leave your possessions, if you don't pick up your cross, I forget what the other two.
You were saying loving others, loving Him.
Yeah, you have to love. Yeah, you have to love others. There's no, that's not an option.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, Molly was listening in class.
It was a good class.
Wow. Okay, so that brings us to.
Apparently, I wasn't listening, but
You had a lot of you have a lot of information.
yeah.
Praise God, isn't it?
Yeah.
Awesome. People,
Yeah.
That's what I want to see for you and your generation. You guys take up that mantle and be filled. We want to fill you, but then from there you continue the study. You find the stuff that we haven't found yet.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing, isn't it? You'll see things in Scripture that I've never seen. And that's, to me, was one of the most rewarding things is when somebody will come up and say, well, what about this? Look, he did this. And I never saw that.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know her name, one of the young ladies in class, she made some point in class. I thought, I never thought of that. It was so, and here's what you do. You probably do this, Mark. Then you teach it like you thought of it.
Always. I think one of my joys of life was when Molly, one day, we were studying the measuring cup, and I just kind of just blew by it. It was just like, it's a measuring cup. With what measure you meet, it'll be measured to you again. Okay, go on. And then Molly goes like, no, I think it means something different. And I'm going like, and my thought was, okay, Molly, it's a measuring. What measure you meet, it'll be measured to you again. And I'm like, okay, let's just keep moving. Molly's like, no, I think it means. I said, well, you study it on your own time, and you tell me what you find. She comes back the next morning, and she's so excited, and it was revolutionary. I mean, it is. In fact, it's so revolutionary. The Summer Guild this summer, it's the theme of our guild.
Unexplainable increase.
Wow.
Well, it's in the Bible. It's not like it's me finding it.
Yeah, but
No, you had to find it.
who else has seen that?
No.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's why somebody said the Bible is the only book that reads you.
Ooh.
And it does. There's no book like the Bible. I mean, people have been seeing things, new things, for centuries, for millennia. And
Before we get into Luke, you said something in class that blew me away. You said words cannot be defined apart from something.
Words don't have meaning. Words don't have literal meaning. Words get their meaning from context. And I tell you, when the first time I ever heard that, I just thought that was the most liberal, radical, stupid thing I'd ever heard of. Oh, yeah. Because my whole life, the pastor had been saying, the literal meaning of this word is that. Well, words don't have literal meaning. They get their meaning from context. So I'll say to you, what is the literal meaning of the word key, K-E-Y?
Yeah.
You don't know until I tell you the context. It's the key idea. It's the thing I opened the door with. It's the low island.
What was that other word you used as an illustration?
Well, cleave is a word that means two opposite things. It means to stick two things together, but it also means to cut two things apart.
Yeah, right.
Words are just more complicated than to say the literal meaning is this. That's a vast oversimplification. Language doesn't work that way.
Which probably that was really cool for you when you were sharing in class this morning about Greek had like 10,000 words.
Yeah.
And then Hebrew had like 200.
Yeah.
And so
Isn't that cool?
for that point you just said, like it would make a lot more sense if you need the context to understand the minimal amount of words that Hebrew has.
Yeah, it does. It does help, but it also helps you to appreciate Hebrew, because I know people who say, "Well, Greek is better because there are 5 words for love, and there's 2 words for different ways to cry, and there's all these different words, and then you'll have one word in Hebrew. Well, Hesed is translated 169 different ways in 5 different English translations. One word.
God's loving kindness.
Well, that word
Merciful.
was invented by Miles Coverdale in 1535 to translate the word hesed. That word was made up trying to translate this untranslatable word. So, but in Leviticus, hesed means disgrace.
Yeah, I don't get it. Because of
Crazy.
the context, right?
Because of the context, yeah. So I love the way language works. But
Okay, so
I am as fundamentalist. I'm as pointy-headed fundamentalist as you can possibly imagine, listeners. I'm not a liberal. So trust me, words get their meaning from context.
But the reason that I love Hebrew much more than Greek wasn't because of the way you guys just described it. It was because when I took my exams in seminary, I only had 200 words to memorize in Hebrew.
Ding ding. There you go. That's true. And therefore, I think it's much more important if you're going to be serious. I mean, you need to handle both languages, but I think it's more important that you handle some Hebrew because
absolutely.
Greek is so precise. The translations don't vary much, but you'll read a Hebrew translation
It's completely,
and one verse will be completely different than
Absolutely.
another one. And you
Absolutely.
go, and why is that? Because the translator looked at the context and said, well, no, that word must mean this in that context. Yeah.
And Hebrew is 2/3 of the Bible.
Yeah.
You know,
There you go.
New Testament's 1/3 of the Bible, so we might as well study the majority of the Bible,
Right.
which is Hebrew.
And people look at it, it's right to left and the different alphabet. You learn the alphabet in 30 minutes, okay?
Yeah.
We're going to get past that really quick.
Mike, so the two of us have studied Hebrew for years. It's beautiful, isn't it?
It is.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and it's the only language that's ever been reborn. It was the dead language,
Right.
and it was brought back to life
Interesting.
The
again.
Masoretes and so
Yeah.
forth. Okay, here we go. So we've talked about Matthew, Mark talked about Matthew, and now we're going to get to Dr. Luke. What makes Dr. Luke so? And Dr. Luke, he wasn't even around during the time of Christ, was he?
Well, he's not an eyewitness. No, he tells us that. And he writes more of the New Testament than anybody else. Paul writes 24%. He writes 28%.
I didn't realize that.
Most of the Luke Acts is one book.
Okay, that's the first. Now, I know that to be true, but I've never heard anyone say that before.
Right.
I used to think I'm crazy.
No, Luke Acts is one book. Life situation, we believe, of course, I can't be dogmatic. Never be dogmatic about what the Bible's not dogmatic about.
I've heard that before.
We think it's,
So
Bill
good.
Lane taught me this, it's a cover letter for a collection of Paul's letters that were submitted at his trial.
Whoa.
And if you understand that, then you read Luke and you see there's an emphasis on the innocence of Jesus in Luke that the other Gospels don't have. Everyone, when you get to the trial, everyone is saying he's innocent. Pilate keeps saying he's innocent. The soldier who crucifies him says he's innocent. I mean, people keep saying this man is innocent. And okay, that makes perfect sense. And if Luke is a companion of Paul, you see this reaching out to the Gentiles. That's only Luke. What does Mary sing? He's a light to lighten the Gentiles, or maybe Simeon sings that. But so Luke is very different, and he's just interested in different things.
So, from my study, I have found that he's also interested in medical things.
Absolutely, he uses medical words when he doesn't need medical words. Which my father was a doctor. My dad did the same thing.
Interesting.
So. When John the Baptist's father asked for a writing tablet, that's the technical term for a prescription tablet that doctors write prescriptions on.
Interesting.
So that's the word he knows, right? So that's the word he uses. He talks about demons convulsing. Someone had a convulsion.
Interesting.
Only Luke says that John the Baptist baptized for the remission of sin, and it's the same word we use for the remission of cancer.
Interesting.
So so
cancer's in remission.
that's just how doctors are. Doctors, that's their
Interesting.
world, right?
Interesting, yeah.
And he's very interested in Jesus' healings. He's the only guy that talks about the guy with dropsy, which is really gross. I looked it up.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Wait, what's the significance of him talking about the innocence of Jesus?
Well, if this is a document that's been used in Paul's trial, I want to establish the fact that Christianity is no threat to Rome. We are no threat to you. And that's pretty much the perspective in Luke. And he's interested in the Gentiles, as you might have expect from being exposed to Paul. And one of the things of the structure of the book, and you're a structure guy, and Bill used to say you need to learn to listen to structure. Well, the great central section, most of the Gospel of Luke, 10 chapters in the middle, is just the last journey to Jerusalem, begins in chapter 9, and Jesus resolutely set his face for Jerusalem, and the rest of it's a journey. Isn't it interesting that a person who traveled with Paul tells the life of Jesus as a journey?
Didn't you do an album like that one time? Joy in the Journey?
I did a song called Join the Journey.
It wasn't,
I did an album on Luke, too, though.
That was like
cool.
1990s?
I don't know. I think you were still in elementary school. So. Did your mom give you that record?
Wait.
I hear a lot these days, you're my mother's favorite artist. I hear that a lot.
You'll know when you're done when they say you're my grandmother.
Yeah, exactly. That's when I'm
no.
done. Yeah. My
that's
grandma
terrible.
used to listen to you all the time. Of course, she died 10 years ago. Okay.
Oh, no.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, that's Luke. And then finally, John. John tends to be our favorite gospel. Why? Because we read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they have basically the same outline. Then we read John, and it's 92% unique. 92% of John is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which I think is just amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's why I tend to gravitate toward John all the time.
Yep,
You know?
we do. And John is elegant. I mean, John has been preaching and teaching these things for 50 years. So they're little snatches of sermons. One of the
cool.
Oh, there's the
didn't think
sermonic
about that.
blocks all through John. Often they're in red letters, and the translators mistakenly think it's Jesus talking.
Like for God so loved the world.
That's John.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that, John will say something like, "This is the verdict. Light is coming into the world." That's preaching.
Yeah.
That's not Jesus talking,
Yeah.
right? And that's one of the uniquenesses of John, and it's just elegant because he has had all this time to think about it, and he's been preaching about it. And
How about when John and Peter rush to the tomb, and Peter gets there before him, but Peter doesn't go in. But
no, John gets there before him, right?
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, and then Peter walks in.
Okay,
That's
I'm
right.
90 years old. I'm writing this story. He hasn't outrun anybody in a long time. He's bragging.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
They were running, and the younger he outran Peter.
Awesome.
Yeah, he hadn't outrun anybody in a long time. So, yeah.
He says something similar to what he was one of Jesus' favorites, right? When he's laying on Jesus' breast.
Well, he's Jesus' first cousin. Did you know that?
Oh, that's interesting.
John and Jesus are first cousins. How do we get this? The three women who went to the tomb, they're two Marys. And then there's this third woman who's described three different ways. Now, it may be three different people. I'm not going to be dogmatic about it because the Bible's not dogmatic. But she's described as Salome. That's her name. She's described as his mother's, Jesus, his mother's sister. And she's described as the mother of Zebedee's children.
Ooh.
So if you put those three things together, Jesus and John are first cousins.
And James as well.
Well, and that's what the girl said in class. She held up her little hand. She said, well, that means James was his cousin too. I go, I never thought of that.
Really?
No, I never thought of that. So they're first cousins, which explains why does Jesus entrust his mother to John from the cross?
Oh, and
They're
it's
cousins.
relatives.
Right, they're cousins.
Which would have been part of Scripture, too.
Absolutely.
Family had to take care
it
of them.
all fits together.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
John,
And those are looking at the details and saying, what does that detail mean?
Wait. John now becomes the redeemer of his family. This passed down.
The kinsman redeemer.
The kinsman redeemer.
Mhm. Yeah.
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 And now...
And he's probably 14, 15 years old. And part of my thinking is he needs Mary as much as Mary needs him.
First time I've heard of this. How old?
Well, if John lives to be into the reign of Trajan started reigning in 98.
Yeah.
He lives to be 100 years old. Okay. And if you do the math backwards from 98, if he's 198 and you do the math through math
He's
backwards.
around 12, 14 years old.
He's 12. When he's standing in front of the cross, he's 12, 14 years old.
Whoa.
Which explains a lot. He never opens his mouth. Okay? When he's with
Whoa.
Peter, he's always with Peter in Acts. It's always Peter and John. John never opens his mouth. Why? He's just a kid. He's a young person. Except, here's one proviso, though. In Judaism, what do we have? You're a child or you're a man. When do you become a man in Judaism? When you're 12.
Yeah, 12
When
years
you're
old.
12. So it's not exactly our world. We're thinking he's a little kid. Well, in Judaism, no, he's not a little kid.
No, but that explains a lot about him leaning on Jesus' breast.
Exactly.
He's a kid.
Exactly. And they're cousins. They know, they have this kind of intimacy.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It also explains him outrunning Peter.
Yeah. And again, when he writes it, he's almost 100 years old, and I just see this little old guy, a lot like me, saying, yeah, I outran him. What do you think of that? And as people are thinking. Yeah.
Especially if he was the last one alive. Like, Peter wasn't going to tell him to
And that's
erase
another
it.
good point. Everyone else is gone. Peter's been dead for 40 years. He's the last living disciple. When you read the Gospel of John, you're sitting at the feet of the last living disciple of Jesus. He's telling you stories that nobody else can tell you.
And wasn't he also tortured toward the end? I was was taught that he was put in a cauldron of boiling oil.
Yes,
Patmos.
I've heard those things. I don't know. That's not part of my my area.
Yeah.
But I think they were all martyred except one of them. But
Crazy.
James, his brother, was the first one to die,
Beheaded.
and John was the last one to die. These brothers are the bookends
no
of the
way.
12.
Structure.
Found it. Not again.
Mike, this has just been a lot of fun.
Well, thanks. Thank you.
You know, that's what the scriptures really should do to us. You know? Can you imagine, can you imagine Sunday morning doing something like this in front of a congregation?
Oh, yeah. I do it all the time.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, but just by myself.
No, wouldn't this be, I think people would love something like this.
Yeah.
To be able to sit and discuss things like this.
Calvin Miller used to do that at his church. He's the first church I ever went to where you go into church and there'd be 2 chairs and microphones sitting there, and he would sit there and talk to someone instead of a sermon.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, of course, Calvin Miller was a great writer and a great speaker, right?
Yeah.
But, and they would have these really cool conversations. And, I think that
The original podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, folks, this is interesting. You know, this is the way the Bible it's been written for our delight, our joy.
Yes.
You know? You know?
And it is interesting. Anybody that makes it boring,
Infinitely
They're not doing it right.
it is
interesting.
infinitely.
I mean,
John, what does John say? The whole world couldn't contain the books that could be written about this guy. John's at 100. He's still really excited about all this.
Okay, you said something the other day in class that will change it already has changed me, but it will continue to change my life forever. You said, and I'll paraphrase it, that sometimes when we read the Bible, we become too familiar.
Yes.
And I've just started for the first time this year. I try to go through the Bible in a year, but I just started the Gospels, so I'm in Matthew right now. And as I started reading it, I started just noticing my speed just picking up because I've read this before.
You know what the next verse is going to say.
Yeah.
Right.
But all of a sudden, after that class, I decided, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to see what I haven't seen before. And already God has extraordinarily blessed me.
Yeah.
That devotion I gave this morning was a result of slowing
Just
down.
listening.
Yeah.
Well, what does the Shema teach us? The best way to love God is to listen to Him. The best way to love God is to listen to His Word. And it is a reason, I think, for using new translations.
Read something
because,
different. Yeah.
You know, we talk about this. I think in NIV. Right, so when I read Matthew, I know in NIV, I know what the next verse is going to say, especially the Gospels. And you should never think you know what the Bible's about to say.
Yeah, let's say I think in Hebrew and Greek.
Okay.
Both
well,
of them.
I say sometimes I listen to the Bible the way I listen to my wife. I know what she's going to say, right? So I stop listening, and I'm right. She'll say it, and it'll be what I know she's going to say, right? And same thing with the Bible. I think I know what it's going to say, but I really don't know what it's going to say. So I need to love my wife by listening to her, and I need to love the Bible by listening to it.
Great ending here.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to another Fasten Like Nails, where we're really trying to make the Bible, the Word of God, God's words to us, come alive so we might know Him more intimately, proclaim Him more passionately, and enjoy Him more infinitely. We'll look forward to doing this again soon. God bless.
You've been listening to Fastened Like Nails, a presentation of Lamplighter Ministries. Our mission is to make ready a people prepared for the Lord by building Christ-like character, one story at a time. To learn more about our family collection of rare books, dramatic audios, or guild programs, visit lamplighter.net. To hear more podcasts, search for Fastened Like Nails wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a question you would like to submit for the Lamplighter team, visit fastenedlikenails.net and fill out the form. That's fastenedlikenails.net.
What if you could learn from the creative minds and talents behind Lamplighter Theater?
I've never seen anything like it.
This summer, Lamplighter presents the Lamplighter Guild. A week of mentoring and apprenticeship in the dramatic arts. Learn scriptwriting, music composition, sound design, directing, and voice acting from world-class professionals. Registration for the Lamplighter Guild is limited, so sign up today at lamplighter.net. Lamplighter.net.